The crimson alert blared through the corridors of Horizon 7, its wail, climbing 2 octaves, before dropping back to that familiar, stomach-twisting bass note. Captain Mara Kane shot up from her quarter's narrow bunk feet, finding the cold titanium floor, before her conscious mind had fully pulled itself from the edges of sleep. 20 years since the great galactic crisis had ended, and still her body responded to alarms with the immediacy of wartime. "Status," she commanded, her voice still rough with sleep. The room's ambient systems activated at her voice, bathing the sparse quarters in a soft blue glow. "Incoming transmission." "Captain." The station's artificial intelligence responded its neutral tone, betraying nothing of the urgency that had triggered the alert. "Origin point is beyond the 5-element planets. Signal integrity compromised." Mara tapped the neural implant behind her ear, activating the direct link to the command center. "Patch it through." The sound that followed was nothing like the crisp transmissions typical of interplanetary communications. It cracked and wheezed, the voice within it, broken into fragments like shattered glass. Through the static, 3 phrases emerged with terrifying clarity. "We were wrong. It has landed. Stars into ash." Then nothing. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She had heard desperate calls before, ships caught in gravitational anomalies, colonies facing environmental catastrophes. But this was different. There was something in that voice, a primal terror, that transcended the distortion. "Source identification?" she asked, already reaching for her uniform. "Negative. Signal characteristics match no registered vessels or colonies." Horizon 7 was the Earth Alliance's furthest outpost on Saturn's moon Titan, positioned as both a research facility and emergency response hub for the outer settlements. As commander of the Orbital Rescue Squad, Mara had authority over a small fleet of rapid response vessels. But the 5-element planets, a cluster of 5 habitable worlds, nicknamed after ancient Chinese elemental theory, lay at the very edge of sanctioned space. Beyond them was only darkness and the unknown. "Alert the Phoenix Eppin crew," she ordered, fastening her uniform's gravitational stabilizers. "And inform command." She paused before her mirror, taking in her reflection. At 42, Mara's face had hardened into angles and planes that spoke of the years since the crisis. Her dark hair was pulled back in the severe regulation bun, exposing the faint scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw, a reminder of the Battle of Europa, where she'd lost half her previous command. Sleep deprivation had carved shadows beneath her eyes, but they remained alert, calculating. The eyes of someone who had seen too much destruction to be easily rattled. Yet that voice on the transmission had rattled her. The command center was already abuzz with activity when she arrived. Lieutenant Tashir, her communications specialist, was hunched over the quantum receiver, attempting to boost the signal's coherence. "Anything new?" Mara asked, settling into the commander's chair at the center of the room. Tashir shook his head, frustration evident in the tight set of his shoulders. "Signal's gone, Captain. We've got the recording, but there's been no repetition. I've tried all frequencies." "And command?" This time, it was her second-in-command, Sergeant Cale Ramos, who answered. Ramos was built like the gravity tanks they'd used during the crisis, all bulk and power, but with a precision to his movements that belied his size. "They've advised caution, Captain. Given the uncertain origin and the area in question, they're recommending we maintain position and monitor for further communications. In other words, do nothing. Wait for the bureaucracy of the Earth Alliance to decide whether an unknown distress call from uncharted space warranted intervention, by which time whoever had sent that desperate message would likely be beyond help." "Play it again," Mara ordered, leaning forward. The broken voice filled the command center once more. "We were wrong. It has landed. Stars into ash." Something in the fragmented message tugged at Mara's memory. Not the words themselves, but the quality of fear behind them. It reminded her of the final transmissions from the Europa mining colony, before it was consumed by what they later discovered was a quantum reactor breach. The sound of people facing something they couldn't comprehend, much less fight. "What's our nearest vessel to the 5-element cluster?" she asked, her decision already forming. Ramos pulled up the tactical display. The Phoenix F is prepped for departure. Standard rescue configuration with a crew of 8. But Captain Command was explicit. "I'm aware of what Command said, Sergeant." Mara cut him off, rising from her chair. "But there's someone out there who needs help, and that's what we do. Prepare the Phoenix for immediate launch. I'll lead the mission myself." "With respect, Captain," Ramos's voice, lowered concern evident in his dark eyes. "We don't know what we're flying into." Mara met his gaze steadily. "When do we ever—" 3 hours later, the Phoenix Demuth broke from Titan's orbit, its fusion engines pushing against the vast emptiness of space. The rescue vessel was sleek, despite its utilitarian design crafted for speed and adaptability rather than comfort. Inside the bridge, Mara studied the star charts projected across the main view screen. The 5-element planets, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, orbited a young star at the edge of Alliance-charted space. Initial survey teams had identified all 5 as potential candidates for terraforming, though only metal and earth had seen the beginnings of human settlement. The distress call had come from somewhere beyond them in the darkness, where stars grew sparse. "Set course for Kirath 9, she instructed the navigation officer, referring to the research outpost established on Metal 2 years prior. "It's the furthest human presence in that sector. If anyone would have detected unusual activity, it would be them." As the Phoenix accelerated to superluminal speeds, Mara retreated to her private quarters adjacent to the bridge. There, she accessed her personal log. Captain's log, 2nd month of October 2472. "We are responding to an unidentified distress call from beyond the 5-element cluster. Command has advised against intervention without further intelligence, but—" She paused, weighing her words. "The nature of the transmission suggests immediate danger. I've made the decision to investigate, accepting full responsibility for any consequences. The memory of Europa weighs heavily on this choice. I lost most of my crew there because help came too late. I won't let that happen again, not if I can prevent it." She closed the log and leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The ship hummed around her, the familiar vibration of engines, pushing against the laws of physics. 3 days to reach Kirath 9 at their current speed. 3 days to wonder what waited for them in the darkness beyond the 5-element planets. 3 days to remember the terrified voice, stars into ash. The journey passed in relative quiet, the crew occupied, with preparations for unknown contingencies. Mara spent hours reviewing emergency protocols, studying the sparse data available on the 5-element region, and analyzing the distress call with the ship's advanced audio processing systems. The results yielded little beyond what they already knew. The transmission had been badly degraded, suggesting powerful interference rather than mere distance. On the 3rd day, as they approached the Kirath 9 system, the ship's AI assistant, codenamed Halo, alerted Mara to an anomaly. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy patterns ahead," Halo's androgynous voice reported. "The readings do not match any known natural phenomena in our database." Mara entered the bridge, where the main screen displayed a visual representation of the energy waves, rippling patterns of blue and violet against the black of space, like the aurora borealis untethered from any planetary atmosphere. "Origin?" she asked, studying the display. "Appears to be emanating from Kirath 9 itself, Captain." The science officer, Lieutenant Park, responded. "Whatever it is, it's powerful enough to disrupt standard communications. It might explain why we've had no contact from the research outpost." Mara felt a chill run down her spine. "Reduce speed and raise shields. Approach with caution." As the Phoenix Event decelerated to subliminal speeds, the metal planet came into view on their screens. From orbit, Kirath 9 appeared, much as the survey records had described it, a world of copper mountains and silver plains, rich in rare metals and minerals. But as they drew closer, discrepancies became apparent. "Captain," Park's voice was tense, "the topography doesn't match our records. There should be a research settlement in the northern hemisphere, but I'm detecting nothing. Just a massive depression in the surface." "Scan for life signs." Mara ordered, a sense of dread building in her chest. Minimal biological activity detected. No human life signs at expected locations. Park hesitated, adjusting his instruments. But there's something else. The atmospheric composition has been altered. Elevated carbon and trace elements I can't identify. Mara made her decision. Prepare a landing party. Full environmental suits, weapons active. We need eyes on the ground. Sergeant Ramos stepped forward. I'll lead the team, Captain. No, Mara shook her head. I need you coordinating from the ship. I'll lead this one myself. She saw the protest forming in Ramos's eyes, but he knew better than to challenge her in front of the crew. Instead, he nodded curtly. I'll prepare the shuttle. 20 minutes later, Mara stood in the shuttle bay with 3 crew members, Lieutenant Park for scientific analysis, Security Officer Wei for protection, and Medical Officer Trent for any survivors they might find. All were encased in the sleek confines of Alliance environmental suits, their faces visible through the transparent helmets. Sensors indicate the atmosphere is technically breathable, Park was saying, checking his equipment one last time. But the unknown particulates make it inadvisable to expose ourselves directly. Mara nodded, securing her helmet. We stay sealed until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Communication channels open at all times. If anyone experiences equipment malfunctions or unusual symptoms, we return to the shuttle immediately. Clear. 3 helmets nodded in unison. The descent to Kirath 9's surface was smooth, the shuttle cutting through the upper atmosphere with barely a shudder. As they approached the coordinates, where the research settlement should have been, however, the view through the forward viewport became increasingly disturbing. What had appeared from orbit as a depression was in fact a vast crater, its edges melted and fused, as if subjected to extreme heat. At its center, where the settlement's central hub should have stood there, was only a twisted mass of metal and synthetic materials partially buried in fine, dark powder. What could cause this kind of damage? Wei whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Temperature required to melt these alloys would exceed 3,000 degrees Celsius. Park replied, his scientific detachment failing to mask his shock. Nothing in our records suggests Kirath 9 experiences volcanic activity or meteor impacts of this magnitude. The shuttle settled on a relatively flat area near the crater's edge. Through the viewport, the landscape appeared almost lunar in its desolation, barren and covered in that same fine, dark powder that had half buried the settlement remains. Is that ash? Medical Officer Trent asked as they prepared to disembark. Park had already taken preliminary readings. Organic compounds present, carbon-based. He looked up, his expression grim behind his helmet. Yes, it appears to be ash. A lot of it. Mara felt her stomach tighten but kept her voice steady. Let's move out. Stay together, standard search pattern. Our priority is finding survivors. The moment her boots touched the surface of Kirath 9, Mara knew something was fundamentally wrong with this world. Despite the environmental suit's insulation, she could feel an unnatural heat radiating through the ground. The ash shifted beneath her feet like fine sand, occasionally revealing glimpses of what lay beneath fragments of structure's equipment and other things she forced herself not to identify too closely. Readings are off the charts, Park murmured, scanning in all directions. This isn't just destruction, Captain. It's as if something consumed the energy here. The molecular structures are breaking down at a subatomic level. They moved carefully toward the center of the crater, each step raising small clouds of ash. The twisted remains of what had once been the settlement's central hub loomed ahead, its metal skeleton reaching toward the copper-colored sky, like the bones of some prehistoric creature. I'm detecting a power signature, Wei reported suddenly. Faint but active. Northeast quadrant, approximately 200 meters. Hope flared briefly in Mara's chest. Lead on! They followed Wei across the blasted landscape, eventually reaching what appeared to be a partially collapsed dome structure, one of the climate control silos that had been designed to gradually alter Kirath 9's atmosphere to better support human life. Unlike the surrounding structures, This one was only partially destroyed, its lower levels seemingly intact. "Life signs?" Mara asked. Trent consulted her medical scanner. One humanoid signature, weak but stable. "Way, secure the entrance. Park check structural integrity. Trent with me." The interior of the climate silo was dark, illuminated only by the emergency lights of their suits and the occasional spark from damaged systems. The airlock had been compromised, but the inner chamber remained sealed its secondary door, requiring manual override to access. "Hello," Mara called through the communication system as they worked on the door. "Earth Alliance Rescue. If you can hear me, we're coming in." A weak voice responded through their comms, distorted, but understandable. "Sealed myself in. Don't know if it's still out there." The door finally yielded with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a small chamber converted into a makeshift shelter. Emergency lighting cast a pale blue glow over the sparse contents, survival rations, water recyclers, and a single figure huddled in the corner, dressed in a tattered research uniform. "I'm Captain Mara Kane," she said, approaching slowly. "We received a distress call." The figure looked up, revealing a gaunt face, dominated by intelligent eyes, wild with exhaustion and fear. "Dr. Elian Vore," he introduced himself, voice hoarse. "Biological engineering. I was the lead researcher here." He glanced around, disoriented. "How many days has it been?" "Since what Dr. Vore?" Mara asked gently, while Trent moved forward to check his physical condition. Vore's laugh was hollow, verging on hysterical. "Since it came. Since everything burned." "What came, Doctor? What happened here?" The scientist's eyes, focused suddenly locking onto Mara's, with unexpected intensity. "We detected it 3 weeks ago. An object moving at impossible speeds, adjusting trajectory in ways that defied physics. We thought—" He broke off, coughing violently. Trent administered a mild sedative, monitoring his vitals. "He's suffering from dehydration and exhaustion, but no immediate life-threatening conditions. No sign of radiation or contamination." "Dr. Vore," Mara pressed gently, "what happened when this object arrived?" Vore seemed to collect himself, his scientific training reasserting itself through the trauma. "It landed approximately 12 kilometers north of the main settlement. Initial readings suggested it was roughly cylindrical, perhaps 20 meters in length. We sent a team to investigate standard protocol." His voice wavered. "They reported metallic composition, unknown alloy, extreme heat signatures. And then their transmission stopped." He took a shuddering breath before continuing. 6 hours later it emerged. Not a ship, not a probe. Something alive. Metallic but organic. It rose into the air and began feeding. "Feeding," Park echoed, looking up from his instruments. "On energy, on matter, on everything." Vore's hands twisted together. "It absorbed radiation, heat, electrical systems. Then it started on organic matter. People. They just combusted from the inside, turned to ash in seconds." His eyes glazed with remembered horror. "I was in this silo updating atmospheric formulas. The structure's radiation shielding must have hidden me. I sealed myself in when I saw what was happening through the monitors." Mara felt cold despite the persistent heat. "The distress call." "I tried." Vore shook his head. "Communication systems were among the first things it destroyed. Whatever you received, it wasn't from us. Not directly." Park was scanning the interior of the shelter, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Captain, there's something else. The readings I'm getting from the surrounding area. There are trace elements I can't identify. And the gravitational measurements are wrong." "Wrong how?" Mara demanded. "Micro-fluctuations in the gravitational field. As if something is bending space-time on a localized level." The science officer turned to Vore. "Doctor, in your research, did you ever encounter anything about gravitational manipulation technology?" The bioengineer's expression shifted subtly. This facility was primarily focused on terraforming and biological adaptation studies. But, he hesitated, there were other projects. theoretical work mostly. Nothing that should have attracted this. Something in his tone made Mara suspicious. Dr. Vore, as an Alliance officer, I need to know everything about your research here, especially anything that might relate to what attacked this settlement. Before Vore could respond, Wei's urgent voice came through their comms. Captain, I'm detecting movement outside the structure. Multiple signatures closing fast. Human, Mara asked, already moving toward the exit. Negative. Readings inconsistent with any known life forms. Mara's mind raced through the available options. The Phoenix of Venth remained in orbit, but the shuttle was their only immediate means of escape. If something had attacked the settlement with the ferocity Vore described, they needed to retreat and reassess. Everyone back to the shuttle, she ordered. Dr. Vore, you're coming with us. Grab only what you absolutely need. We move in 30 seconds. The scientist snatched a small data cylinder from a hidden compartment, securing it inside his tattered uniform. Ready. They emerged from the climate silo into Kirath 9's eerie, ash-covered landscape. The copper sky had darkened thick clouds, gathering with unnatural speed. Wei led them back toward the shuttle, her weapon drawn and ready. Multiple signatures converging, she reported tensely. 200 meters and closing. I don't see anything, Trent said, scanning the horizon. Below us, Wei responded. They're moving through the ash. As if on cue, the fine powder at their feet began to shift and rise, forming strange, undulating patterns across the crater floor. The movement was barely perceptible at first, but rapidly accelerated, coalescing into humanoid shapes, ash figures rising like grotesque phoenixes from the remains of the settlement. What the hell? Mara began, but was cut off as the nearest ash figure lunged forward with impossible speed. Wei fired her weapon, emitting a pulse of concentrated energy that tore through the creature. For a moment, it seemed to dissipate, ash particles scattering, but then they rushed back together, reforming the humanoid shape. They're not biological, Park shouted, frantically analyzing with his scanner. Some kind of electromagnetic cohesion holding the ash particles together like a magnetic field with consciousness. Run, Mara ordered, firing her own weapon to create a temporary path through the advancing figures. To the shuttle now. They raced across the crater, the ash figures pursuing with a fluid grace that seemed to mock the laws of physics. Twice the creatures nearly engulfed Trent, who was struggling to keep pace, but concentrated fire from Wei and Mara temporarily dispersed them. The shuttle loomed ahead, its sleek form, a promise of safety amid the nightmare landscape. Mara slammed her hand against the external access panel, the door hissing open, agonizingly slowly. Inside, she shouted, providing covering fire as the others scrambled aboard. Wei was the last before Mara, pausing at the entrance to lay down suppressive fire. As Mara turned to follow, an ash figure surged up directly in her path, its featureless face inches from her helmet. For a terrifying moment, she froze, staring into the swirling vortex where eyes should have been. Then, Wei grabbed her arm, yanking her into the shuttle as the door sealed behind them. Launch, Mara commanded, and the pilot engaged thrusters immediately, the sudden acceleration pressing them against the hull as the shuttle rocketed away from the surface. Through the viewport, they watched in horror as hundreds of ash figures converged on the spot they had just vacated, merging into a massive writhing column that reached toward their escaping vessel. What were those things? Trent gasped, still struggling to catch her breath. It was Vore who answered, his voice distant with shock. The dead. Everyone who was at the settlement when it attacked. Their remains. Animated somehow. Park was still analyzing the readings he'd taken. The electromagnetic patterns are like nothing I've ever seen. It's as if the ash has been infused with some kind of programmable energy, almost like a technological parasite using the remains as raw material. The shuttle shuddered violently as it broke through Kirath 9's upper atmosphere, alarms blaring throughout the small vessel. What now? Mara demanded, moving to the cockpit. The pilot, Lieutenant Sato, gestured to the instrumentation panel, where warning lights flashed red. Energy spike approaching from the planet's surface. Massive power signature, it's following us. On the external cameras, a stream of metallic light was indeed rising from the center of the crater they had just escaped, piercing through the atmosphere like a solid beam. Evasive maneuvers, Mara ordered, but Sato was already banking the shuttle sharply. Too late. The beam struck their port side, sending the shuttle into an uncontrolled spin. Emergency systems engaged automatically stabilizers, fighting against the centrifugal force, threatening to tear the vessel apart. Structural integrity at 60%. Sato reported through gritted teeth, hands dancing across the controls. Main propulsion damaged. The Phoenix, Mara instructed, activating her direct comms link to the ship. Ramos, do you copy? We need immediate extraction. Static filled the channel. Then Ramos's voice broke through, distorted but recognizable. Reading you. Position locked. Launching rescue team. The shuttle continued its desperate climb systems, failing one by one, as the beam of energy pursued them relentlessly. Through the viewport, Mara could see the Phoenix of Fouth descending rapidly toward their position, its much larger bulk presenting an imposing silhouette against the darkness of space. They're launching the emergency tether, Sato announced, hope coloring his voice for the first time. 300 meters and closing. The magnetic tether extended from the Phoenix like a lifeline designed to capture disabled vessels and draw them into the safety of the main hangar bay. If they could maintain their trajectory for just a few more moments. Another blast from the surface struck the shuttle, this time breaching the hull. Warning alarms screamed as atmosphere began venting into space. Breach in the cargo section, Wei shouted, already moving to seal the emergency bulkheads. Tether contact in 10 seconds. Sato reported, fighting the increasingly unresponsive controls. Mara watched the distance counter tick down, 200 meters, 150-100, willing the systems to hold together just long enough to reach safety. At 50 meters, the tether locked onto the shuttle's magnetic receptors, the jolt nearly throwing them from their seats. Immediately, the Phoenix began retracting the line, pulling them toward the hangar bay with controlled urgency. We're going to make it, Trent whispered, watching the Phoenix grow larger in their view. But even as the words left her mouth, the energy beam from Kirath 9 intensified, splitting into multiple tendrils that writhed through space like living things. One struck the tether directly, magnetic energy dispersing in a spectacular discharge. Tether failure, Sato cried, as the shuttle began drifting away from the Phoenix. Backup systems not responding. Mara stared at the rapidly widening gap between their damaged shuttle and the relative safety of the Phoenix. The energy tendrils were still pursuing them, but now they were also reaching toward the larger ship. She made her decision in an instant. Sato, divert all remaining power to the communication array. Ramos, she called into her comms, the shuttle is lost. We'll use the emergency EVA pods to reach you, but you need to withdraw to a safe distance immediately after recovery. Captain, we can still attempt. That's an order, Sergeant Mara cut him off. Whatever this thing is, it's escalating. Get the Phoenix to safety. She turned to the others. Emergency EVA pods now. Suit sealed, distress beacons active. The evacuation was organized chaos, each of them scrambling into the tiny one-person pods designed for short-range space survival. The pods were little more than reinforced bubbles, equipped with minimal thrusters and life support meant to keep a person alive long enough to be retrieved. Launch sequence on my mark, Mara instructed, watching the energy tendrils drawing ever closer to both vessels. 3, 2, 1 mark. 5 pods ejected simultaneously from the shuttle's emergency hatches, the miniature thrusters guiding them on an intercept course with the Phoenix. Behind them, the crippled shuttle drifted still, pursued by the writhing energy. Through her pod's small viewport, Mara watched as the Phoenix positioned itself to retrieve them, its hangar bay doors opening wide. The first pod, Sato's, was successfully captured by the ship's gravity field, drawn inside like a fish on a line. Then the energy beam struck the Phoenix directly. For one horrible moment, Mara thought the larger ship would suffer the same fate as the shuttle. But the Phoenix's shields held, dispersing most of the energy, in cascading waves of blue light. "Ramos status," she demanded through her comms. "Shields at 40%, came the tense reply. "We can handle 2 more hits at most. Hurry, Captain." Trent's pod was next, then Park's, both disappearing into the hangar bay. As Wei's pod approached, however, one of the energy tendrils curved around the Phoenix's shields, striking the small vessel directly. Mara watched in horror as the pod disintegrated the officer inside, consumed by the same energy that had destroyed the Kirath-9 settlement. "Wei!" she cried uselessly, her voice echoing in the confines of her own pod. Before she could process the loss, her pod was caught in the Phoenix's gravity field, pulling her rapidly toward safety. Through the viewport, she could see the energy tendrils converging, forming a single massive beam aimed directly at the ship. "Ramos, jump to superluminal as soon as I'm aboard," she ordered. "Don't wait for decompression procedures." The moment her pod cleared the hangar bay doors, the Phoenix lurched as its engines engaged at maximum power. Mara was thrown against the pod's interior, as artificial gravity struggled to compensate for the sudden acceleration, the crushing pressure nearly rendering her unconscious. When she finally managed to extricate herself from the pod, the Phoenix was already at superluminal speed, the stars outside stretched into lines of light on the viewscreens. Sergeant Ramos was waiting, his face grim, as he helped her remove her helmet. "Officer Wei," he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Mara shook her head, the reality of the loss still not fully processed. "What about Dr. Vore and the others?" "Safe. Medical is checking them now." Ramos guided her toward the bridge. "Captain, what the hell was that down there?" "I don't know," she admitted, the exhaustion of the mission finally catching up with her. "But whatever it is, it's unlike anything we've encountered before, and I fear we've only seen the beginning." The Phoenix roof hurtled through space, putting distance between itself and the horror they discovered on Kirath-9. But as Mara watched the sensor readings, still detecting that impossible energy signature, despite the growing distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped at all. They had merely postponed the inevitable confrontation. In the Phoenix's medical bay, Dr. Elian Vore sat perfectly still as the ship's physician examined him. His outward calm betrayed nothing of the calculations racing through his mind, evaluations of risk, probability, and survival. The data cylinder hidden in his clothing contained information that could change the course of human history, or end it. He had made a terrible mistake. They all had. And now the consequences were pursuing them across the stars. 20 hours had passed since their narrow escape from Kirath-9. The Phoenix of Veth continued at superluminal speed toward the relative safety of the 5-element planets, its damaged systems undergoing emergency repairs, while the bridge crew maintained constant vigilance on long-range sensors. Mara had spent most of that time analyzing the data they'd gathered, seeking any clue to the nature of the entity they'd encountered. Now she stood before her assembled senior officers and Dr. Vore in the ship's conference room, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. "Our initial findings suggest we're dealing with an entirely new form of life." She began bringing up holographic displays of their sensor readings. Or, perhaps more accurately, a technological parasite with organic components. "It appears capable of absorbing energy at an unprecedented scale and manipulating matter at a fundamental level." Park, who had been working alongside the ship's science division, stepped forward. "The wreckage we recovered from Kirath-9 contained traces of an unknown alloy with properties that defy conventional physics. More disturbing, we found evidence of human cellular material integrated into its structure as if it had absorbed and repurposed the biological components of its victims." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Are we saying this thing eats people?" Ramos asked bluntly. "In a manner of speaking," Park confirmed. "But it doesn't appear to consume for nutrition in any way we understand. Rather, it seems to analyze and integrate useful components, whether energy technology or biological elements, into its own structure." "Like a virus," Dr. Vore interjected, speaking up for the first time. All eyes turned to him. "Or perhaps more like a technological cancer rewriting the code of everything it touches to serve its own propagation. Mara studied the scientist carefully. Since their rescue, he had been cooperative but distant, providing technical information while carefully avoiding certain topics. The time for such discretion had passed. "Dr. Vore," she said evenly, "I believe you know more about this entity than you've shared. The time for secrets is over. What exactly was being researched at Kirath 9? The scientist met her gaze, a complex emotion flickering across his features. Fear, certainly, but also something that might have been guilt. Officially, Kirath 9 was a terraforming research station, he began slowly. But the Alliance Science Division had additional interests, particularly in the field of space-time manipulation. "You were developing warp technology," Ramos demanded, leaning forward. Vore shook his head. "More theoretical than that. We were studying naturally occurring singularities, micro-black holes that appear and disappear throughout the galaxy. Our instruments detected an unusual concentration of quantum fluctuations in the region beyond the 5-element planets." "And what did you find?" Mara pressed. "Evidence of a stable, navigable Einstein-Rosen bridge, what you might call a wormhole. A tear in the fabric of space-time leading elsewhere." Vore's voice dropped. "We believed it could revolutionize interstellar travel, allow us to reach distant galaxies in moments, rather than generations." Mara felt a chill of premonition. "And something came through." Vore nodded shoulders, slumping. "We activated a quantum beacon designed to map the wormhole's exit point. Instead, we called to it, attracted its attention." He looked up, eyes haunted. "The entity didn't crash on Kirath 9, Captain. It was invited." The implications settled over the room, like a physical weight. If Vore was right, the Earth Alliance had inadvertently made first contact with a being from another dimension or distant galaxy, one with capabilities far beyond their own and apparently hostile intent. "Why didn't you include this in your initial report?" Mara asked, struggling to keep accusation from her tone. "Because I wasn't certain until I analyzed the data." Vore tapped the cylinder he now wore openly around his neck. "The quantum fluctuations we detected just before the entity emerged matched theoretical models for space-time rupture. And there's something else." He hesitated. "The gravitational sensors detected a unique signature from the entity, a pattern that suggests it exists partially in our dimension and partially elsewhere. It's not just consuming energy from our world, it's channeling it somewhere." "To what purpose?" Park asked. "I don't know, but given what we witnessed on Kirath 9, I doubt it's benevolent." A sudden alert from the bridge interrupted their discussion. Halo's synthetic voice projected through the ship's communication system. "Captain Kane's sensors have detected an anomalous energy signature, matching the Kirath 9 pattern. It appears to be following our superluminal trajectory." Every face in the room paled. "That's impossible," Ramos protested. "Nothing can track a ship through superluminal space. The probability field distortions. It's bending space-time." Vore cut in, rising to his feet. "Conventional physics doesn't apply." Mara was already moving toward the door. Battle stations, all non-essential personnel to emergency pods. The bridge was a flurry of activity when she arrived, officers working frantically at their stations, while the main view screen displayed a visual representation of the space behind them, where a glowing point of light was indeed following their wake through the superluminal corridor. "Time to intercept," Mara demanded, taking her command chair. "At current velocities, 18 minutes, the navigation officer reported. "But it's accelerating, Captain." Mara considered their options. The Phoenix was primarily a rescue vessel not designed for combat against unknown entities, with the power to destroy an entire settlement. Their best hope lay in reaching the 5-element cluster, where Alliance defense systems might offer some protection. "Can we increase speed?" she asked. "Engines already at maximum safe parameters," came the reply. "We can push them further, but risk catastrophic failure." "Do it," Mara ordered, "and prepare all defensive systems." The ship lurched as the engines strained beyond their designed capacity, the superluminal corridor extending further ahead of them. On the view screen, the pursuing light seemed to hesitate momentarily, then surged forward with renewed intensity. "It's matching our acceleration," Park reported from the science station. "And the energy readings are—" "Captain, it's changing, evolving." Vore moved to Park's station, examining the readings with growing alarm. "The molecular structure is becoming more complex. It's adapting to superluminal travel, reconfiguring itself, based on what it learned from our ship's energy signature. Time to intercept now, 12 minutes, navigation updated." Mara made a swift decision. "Drop out of superluminal. We can't outrun it, so we fight." The order was executed immediately, the Phoenix shuddering violently as it tore back into normal space. Stars reappeared on the view screen, no longer stretched into lines, but scattered in their familiar patterns. They had emerged on the edge of the five-element cluster, the distant sun illuminating the 5 planets like jewels against the velvet of space. "Shields at maximum. Weapon systems online." Ramos reported, moving to the tactical station. "Though what effect they'll have against something like this?" "We'll find out," Mara said grimly. "Deploy sensor probes. I want to know the moment it appears." The minutes ticked by in tense silence, the crew watching their instruments for any sign of pursuit. Just as Mara began to hope they might have lost their hunter, Halo's voice broke the quiet. "Spatial distortion detected. Something is emerging from superluminal space directly astern." The view screen shifted to show the area behind the Phoenix, where space itself seemed to fold and ripple. From within this distortion emerged a sight that stole the breath from every observer. The entity was no longer the amorphous energy they had glimpsed on Kirath 9. It had taken form, a massive, vaguely humanoid shape composed of swirling metallic particles and crackling energy. Its surface constantly shifted and realigned as if the very atoms that composed it were in perpetual motion. Where a face might have been, there was only a pulsing vortex of light. "Magnificent," Vore whispered, transfixed by the sight. "And deadly," Mara added. "Evasive pattern delta. Target the central mass with primary weapons." The Phoenix banked sharply, its engines flaring, as it executed a complex maneuver designed to present a minimal target profile. Simultaneously, energy weapons charged along the ship's hull, releasing concentrated bursts toward the entity. The beams struck their target directly and were absorbed without apparent effect. If anything, the entity seemed to grow brighter, its form expanding slightly as it processed the new energy. "No impact," Ramos reported unnecessarily. "It's absorbing our weapons fire." The entity moved suddenly, crossing the space between it and the Phoenix with impossible speed. Before the ship could execute another evasive maneuver, tendrils of energy extended from the creature's form, wrapping around the vessel's shields like grasping fingers. "Shields failing." The tactical officer announced, panic edging into his voice. "Power systems fluctuating." Mara felt the deck plates vibrate beneath her feet as the entity began to pull energy directly from the Phoenix's systems. Throughout the ship, lights dimmed and equipment failed as power was leached away. "Reroute emergency power to life support and engines," she ordered. "Prepare for—" Her words were cut short as a massive surge of energy tore through the ship, overloading systems and throwing crew members from their stations. Mara held onto her command chair as the Phoenix spun out of control, emergency klaxons blaring throughout the vessel. "Hull breach on decks 2 and 3, someone shouted through the chaos. "Containment fields failing." Through the view screen, Mara watched in horror as the entity continued to feed on their ship's energy, growing larger and more defined with each passing second. And beyond it, more alarming still, one of the 5-element planets, she thought it might be water, began to glow with unnatural brightness as tendrils of energy extended from the entity toward its surface. "It's not just attacking us," she realized aloud. "It's using us as a conduit to reach the planets." Dr. Vore staggered to her side, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "It's what I feared. The entity doesn't just consume, it transforms. It's trying to convert the planet's core into a stellar furnace, similar to what we glimpsed on Kirath 9. To what end? Mara demanded, helping a fallen officer back to his station. Vor's expression was grim. Based on the data patterns, I believe it's attempting to create a larger version of the wormhole that brought it here. A gateway to bring more of its kind. The implications were catastrophic. If the entity succeeded, it could potentially open a doorway for an invasion force, unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Options? Mara asked, looking to her officers. It was Ramos who answered, his face resolute despite the blood seeping from a wound in his side. The Phoenix carries an experimental device, a prototypical micro-singularity generator. It was designed for creating temporary navigation points in uncharted space, but theoretically, it could be modified to create a contained black hole. Powerful enough to destroy that thing? Mara asked, hope kindling despite the desperate situation. If properly calibrated, yes. But there's a catch. Ramos met her gaze steadily. It would have to be triggered manually from within close proximity to the target. And whoever does so, he didn't need to finish. Whoever activated the device would be consumed, along with the entity. Show me, Mara ordered, her decision already made. As Ramos led her toward the engineering section where the device was stored, the Phoenix continued to shake under the entity's assault. Systems failed throughout the ship, and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Behind them, Dr. Vor followed his scientific curiosity, apparently overriding his fear. The singularity generator was housed in a reinforced chamber near the ship's core, a deceptively small device for something with such destructive potential. It resembled a metallic sphere, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter, its surface etched with complex circuitry. It works by creating a quantum instability at a precise point in space-time. Ramos explained, entering commands into the control panel. When activated, it collapses matter within its radius into a temporary singularity, a black hole that theoretically evaporates after consuming a predetermined amount of mass. Theoretically, Mara repeated. It's never been field-tested at full capacity, Ramos admitted. The risks were deemed too great. And now it's our only hope. Mara studied the device. How do we deliver it to the entity? The auxiliary shuttle in Bay 3 is still operational, Ramos suggested. Small enough to evade detection at least briefly. Mara nodded. Prepare the device. I'll pilot the shuttle myself. Captain, Ramos began to protest, but Mara cut him off with a sharp gesture. This is not open to discussion, Sergeant. I need you to get the Phoenix and its crew to safety. Her voice softened slightly. Besides, I'm the best pilot we have. While Ramos reluctantly began preparations, Dr. Vor approached Mara, his expression troubled. Captain, there's something you should know. He glanced at the singularity generator. If my analysis is correct, this device won't just destroy the entity. It will create a cascade effect through the spatial tear it's generating. The 5-element system. It may not survive. Mara absorbed this information grimly. Are there any settlements on the other planets besides Kirath 9? Small research outposts on Earth and Fire. Perhaps 100 people total. Then we evacuate them if possible. But this entity, this invasion, must be stopped whatever the cost. Mara's resolve hardened. The Alliance rebuilt after the Great Galactic Crisis. We can rebuild again. 15 minutes later, the singularity generator had been modified according to Vor's specifications and loaded onto the small auxiliary shuttle. The Phoenix continued to struggle against the entity's grip, its systems failing one by one. Mara stood in the shuttle bay, saying her final goodbyes to the senior staff. Ramos saluted her sharply, his expression betraying the emotion he couldn't voice. It has been an honor, Captain, he said simply. The honor was mine, Sergeant. Now, Captain Ramos. Mara returned the salute. Get our people home. As she turned to board the shuttle, Dr. Vor stepped forward unexpectedly. I'm coming with you. Mara shook her head. This is a one-way mission, Doctor. I know. Vor's expression was resolute. But the generator requires precise calibration at the moment of activation. The calculations must account for the entity's unique quantum signature, something only I fully understand. He held up his data cylinder. Besides, I helped create this situation. It's only right that I help end it. Mara hesitated, then nodded once. Time was running out. The auxiliary shuttle was barely larger than an escape pod, with just enough room for 2 people, and the singularity generator secured in the rear compartment. As they prepared for launch, the ship's AI Halo established a connection to the shuttle's systems. "Captain, I have configured myself to assist with navigation and targeting," Halo's synthetic voice announced. "My primary systems may be compromised on the Phoenix, but this isolated connection should remain stable." "Thank you, Halo," Mara replied, surprised by the AI's initiative. Though programmed for adaptive learning, Halo had never before shown such independent decision-making. "The entity is currently occupied with energy extraction from both the Phoenix and the water planet," Halo reported. "This provides a 62% probability window for approaching undetected via the planet's shadow." "Plot the course," Mara instructed, engaging the shuttle's engines. As they launched from the Phoenix's bay, Mara took one last look at the ship that had been her home and responsibility. Its hull was scorched, and damaged sections exposed to space, where the entity's energy had breached containment. Yet it was still protecting its crew. The shuttle accelerated away, using minimal power to avoid detection as it curved around the far side of the water planet. From this new vantage point, the full horror of what was occurring became apparent. The entity had grown to massive proportions, its form now resembling less a humanoid and more a swirling vortex of metallic energy. Tendrils extended not just to the Phoenix and water, but toward the other planets as well, creating a complex web of power extraction. Where these tendrils touched planetary surfaces, the land itself seemed to ignite, burning with the same ash-creating process they had witnessed on Kirath 9. "It's further along than I feared," Vor murmured, monitoring the entity's energy signature. "The spatial tear is already forming." Indeed, behind the entity's space itself appeared to be splitting open a jagged wound in reality that revealed nothing but absolute darkness beyond. "How much time?" Mara asked, guiding the shuttle closer. "Minutes at most. Once the tear reaches critical dimension, it becomes self-sustaining." Vor's hands moved over the controls, adjusting the singularity generator's parameters. "We need to reach the entity's central mass, what you might call its heart." Mara nodded grimly, powering up the shuttle's engines for the final approach. "Halo, can you identify the optimal entry point?" "Analyzing energy flow patterns," the AI responded. After a moment, a targeting reticle appeared on the shuttle's view screen, highlighting a pulsing concentration of light near the entity's core. "Target identified. Recommend approach vector 227 Mark 43. The shuttle accelerated, no longer concerned with stealth. As they drew closer, the entity seemed to notice their presence, tendrils of energy breaking away from the planets to reach toward them. Evasive maneuvers. Mara muttered more to herself than her companions as she sent the shuttle into a series of tight spirals and dives. The entity's tendrils followed, but the small vessel's agility allowed them to stay just ahead of the deadly energy. "Generator at 90% charge," Vor reported. "We need to get closer." Mara pushed the shuttle to its limits, the small craft shuddering under the strain as they dove toward the entity's core. All around them, space itself seemed to be breaking down, light bending in impossible ways, gravity fluctuating wildly. "The tear is expanding exponentially," Halo warned, detecting multiple quantum signatures emerging. Through the view screen, Mara could see dark shapes moving within the spatial tear, more entities waiting to pour through into their universe. "Now or never," she said, setting the shuttle on a direct collision course with the entity's heart. "Doctor, prepare the generator." Vor's hands moved with surprising steadiness over the controls, making final adjustments. "Ready. But Captain, someone needs to remain at the controls until impact to ensure precise targeting." Mara understood the implication immediately. "You've done your part, Doctor. I'll take it from here." But Vor shook his head, a sad smile playing at his lips. "My calculations, my responsibility." Before Mara could react, he pressed a sequence on the shuttle's control panel. A transparent barrier slid down between them, sealing Vor in the rear compartment with the generator. "What are you doing?" Mara demanded, attempting to override the partition. "What must be done?" Vor's voice came through the shuttle's communication system. "The generator requires constant adjustment during the final approach, based on the entity's quantum fluctuations. Only I can perform these calculations with sufficient accuracy." "Then I'll stay too," Mara insisted. "We both see this through." "The Phoenix needs its captain." Vor's expression was resolute. "The escape pod is pre-programmed to return you to your ship once the partition deployed. Your job now is to ensure the Alliance learns from our mistake." As if on cue, a small section of the shuttle detached a single-person escape pod, with Mara sealed inside. She pounded against the transparent hull, watching helplessly, as the remainder of the shuttle with Vor at the controls continued its trajectory toward the entity's heart. "Halo," she called desperately. "Override the pod's navigation. Take me back." "I cannot, Captain," the AI responded, genuine regret coloring its synthetic voice. "Dr. Vor's command protocols have locked out all external control." Through the pod's viewport, Mara watched as the shuttle vanished into the swirling mass of the entity, a brief flare of light, marking its passage into the core. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a pulse of pure darkness erupted from the entity's center. The singularity had activated. Space itself appeared to fold inward around the entity reality, bending and compressing as the micro-black hole consumed everything within its reach. The entity's form wavered, its energy tendrils retracting violently as it was pulled inexorably toward the growing singularity. The spatial tear began to collapse as well, the dark shapes within it retreating, or being consumed along with their vanguard. The 5-element planets, though scarred by the entity's feeding, remained intact, as the singularity's pull was precisely calibrated to affect only the space immediately surrounding the entity. Mara's escape pod shot away from the cataclysm, automated systems guiding it back toward the Phoenix, which was already retreating to a safe distance. Through the viewport, she watched as the singularity reached its predetermined limit and began to collapse in upon itself, taking the last traces of the entity with it. Where an existential threat had loomed moments before, there was now only empty space, occasionally distorted by the lingering gravitational waves of the singularity's collapse. Dr. Elian Vor had saved them all. 3 days later, the Phoenix infant limped toward the outer reaches of Alliance space, its damaged systems barely maintaining life support. The crew had worked tirelessly to effect repairs, but the entity's energy assault had compromised key components beyond their ability to restore without a proper space dock. In her quarters, Mara recorded what might be her final captain's log. Captain's log, 2nd month of October, 2472. The Phoenix Infant is en route to Alliance space, following the encounter with the extra-dimensional entity. Dr. Elian Vor sacrificed himself to activate the singularity generator, preventing what would likely have been the beginning of a full-scale invasion. The 5-element planets have sustained significant damage, but preliminary scans indicate the terraforming process may eventually restore them. Of the entity itself, we have only the data collected during our encounter. It appears to have been a form of technological parasite capable of consuming and repurposing energy on a massive scale. Dr. Vor's research suggests it may have evolved specifically to create gateways between dimensions, using stars and planets as power sources. The cost has been high. We lost Security Officer Wei during the evacuation from Karath 9 and 12 other crew members during the entity's attack on the Phoenix. But their sacrifice, along with Dr. Vor's, ensured that humanity will have a chance to prepare for potential future incursions. This is Captain Mara Kane, possibly the final entry. She closed the log and leaned back in her chair, exhaustion etching deep lines around her eyes. The neural implant behind her ear buzzed softly, indicating an incoming communication from the bridge. "Captain." Ramos's voice came through uncharacteristically hesitant. "Long-range sensors have detected something unusual in the debris field, where the singularity collapsed." Mara tensed immediately. "The entity?" "No, at least not as we knew it. It's smaller, almost like a seed." "I'm on my way." The bridge was operating on minimal power, emergency lighting casting long shadows across the weary faces of the crew. The main view screen displayed a magnified image of what appeared to be a small metallic object, drifting amid the scattered debris of the collapsed singularity. "We detected it approximately 20 minutes ago," Ramos explained, as Mara took her place in the command chair. "It's emitting a quantum signature similar to the entity, but at a fraction of the power." "A remnant," Mara suggested, studying the object. Park shook his head. "More like offspring. The molecular structure suggests it formed during the collapse, a compressed version of the original entity's core components." The implications were disturbing. If the entity had somehow managed to preserve a portion of itself, even as it was consumed by the singularity. "Can we contain it?" Mara asked. "Possibly," Park replied. "It's currently dormant, possibly due to energy depletion. If we could construct a quantum isolation field—" "Make it happen," Mara ordered. "But extreme caution, no direct contact." As the science team prepared to retrieve the object, Halo's voice emerged from the ship's communication system. "Captain, I have completed my analysis of Dr. Vor's data cylinder, which was transmitted to my systems before his departure." Vor had entrusted his research to the AI in his final moments, a fact Mara had not known until now. "What did you find?" "The entity was not the first of its kind to visit our dimension," Halo reported. Dr. Vor discovered evidence suggesting similar incursions throughout human history, incidents previously attributed to stellar phenomena, or unexplained colony disappearances. A chill ran down Mara's spine. "How many?" "At least 7 documented cases with matching energy signatures dating back to the earliest days of interstellar travel. In each case, the incursion was isolated and eventually contained but never fully understood." "Until now," Mara murmured. "Indeed. Dr. Vor's research provides the first comprehensive understanding of these entities and their purpose. It appears they are drawn to developing civilizations that reach a certain technological threshold, particularly those experimenting with space-time manipulation." The view screen shifted to display a star chart with 7 points highlighted across Alliance space and beyond. Each marked a location where colonies had mysteriously vanished or stars had unexpectedly died. "They're testing our defenses," Mara realized, "probing for weaknesses." "That is Dr. Vor's conclusion as well." Halo confirmed. "The data suggests these are not random encounters, but deliberate explorations, precursors to a more substantial incursion." Mara stared at the dormant seed drifting in space, a remnant of the horror they had narrowly escaped. In it, she saw not just the immediate threat they had faced, but a harbinger of challenges to come. "Set course for Earth," she ordered. "Maximum sustainable speed. The Alliance Council needs to know what we're facing." As the Phoenix adjusted its trajectory, Mara remained on the bridge, watching the stars. The distress call that had started their journey now seemed like a distant echo, stars into ash, a warning they had only begun to understand. One enemy had been defeated, but the war, she suspected, had only just begun. Whatever came through the darkness between stars, humanity would need to be ready. And in the void where the singularity had collapsed unnoticed by the departing Phoenix, a faint pulse of energy emanated from the dormant seed, a signal traveling outward beyond the boundaries of known space, carrying with it the knowledge the entity had gained in its brief encounter with humanity. A distress call of its own, crackling across dimensions. "We have found them. Prepare."